Well, thanks, Jazz. Xiao and I are kind of co-presenting on this, so I will start things off, give a little bit of an overview of the evolution of us studying emerging risks at the Research Institute. And I'm really glad that Xiao is here as a partner because we've been able to expand that to get more information, get more survey results from the Asia-Pacific region that you'll see here. And notably, while there's a big world out there, some of the risks or emerging risks that people think about can be radically different depending on what markets you may be in. So here's the quick outline that we'll go through. I'll give an introduction and maybe level set a little bit on how this survey has evolved, what our definition of emerging risks and current risks are. Xiao will give her findings on the Asia-Pacific survey that she's been running for a couple of years now, and then I'll double back to put it in the context, probably a little bit more North America focused. Most of the survey respondents in the one that we've been doing for well over a decade now come from the US and Canadian markets, and then a little bit of conclusion. So I think it's appropriate, just to level set that we're here on Darling Harbor, and I think the role of the actuary is somewhat like some of these ferry captains I've been seeing, portaging people back and forth across the harbor. There's a little bit of risks that are straight in front of you. You're moving from one spot to another. There's other boats that you have to pay attention to. There's how choppy is the water? What's the weather looking like? All those things would be in the concept of what we might call in this context a current risk. But I also see that those ferry captains are probably thinking a little bit further down the road. What are some of the things that they're not seeing? What's hiding beneath the surface of the water? What are the tides doing? Even further out into the ocean, what's kind of the weather patterns and sea levels and things like that they need to be aware of that might be emerging risks that they face. So I think in that parallel, our goal in our emerging risk survey that we put on every year is really to kind of seek some insights from the risk managers and the actuarial profession as to what they are thinking about. Things that are probably down the road, as we'll see in a few years, maybe not currently experiencing it today, not part of their what's keeping them awake at night today, but what should they be thinking about? What are they worrying about for 3 to 5 years down the road? We've conducted this across a lot of different markets for about 16 years. I do want to give a shout out to Max Rudolph, who's been the researcher on this ever since it started, and he's done a great job of kind of connecting with his network and our network at the SOA to get people to participate. And so we have a wide array of people that annually participate, but it also helps with this longitudinal analysis. You can kind of see some of the trends that have evolved over the past 15 to 20 years. It's a great partnership that we also have with the Casualty Actuarial Society to work on this together. We have a joint risk management group that is partnered across them. For some years also the Canadian Institute of Actuaries has been a really helpful partner on it as well. And then as we note, we're in the second iteration of what Xiao has been doing on the Asia-Pacific market survey. And coming out of this report, there's a lot of qualitative but also some quantitative analysis, some things that we're noting what the trends are and responses along the way, and I'll highlight a little bit of that. We think of in this survey, and as we get respondents to participate, we want to level set them as to what is really the definition of this emerging risk. That may be a little bit different around the room if we all contributed and say, oh, I think it's this, or I think it's this far down the road, or these are things that I see as current versus emerging. But our definition generally is things that either have not previously occurred or maybe are out of our memory. They haven't occurred for so long that we sort of assess that the probability of their occurrence is very low. They might be considered tail risks. It's hard to assess whether they're a 1 in 50 year, 1 in 10 year, 1 in 100 year. I always am trying to in the catastrophic modeling world, try to get a sense of what that is, even outside of models saying that. But thinking of things that we may not have seen, but are always thinking about that have some probability of occurrence. And given that, we emphasize in the survey, you kind of need to think of this as something that's beyond your strategy horizon. Even at the SOA, we have a strategic plan that goes out about 3 or 4 years. These are some of the things that we want to implement, but you need to be thinking beyond that time horizon to consider things that could be emerging risks, things that you wouldn't just naturally plan for, but are things that could jeopardize your strategy. And then current risks are, things that I think, in the ferry captain world are things that are straight in front of us. We're worrying about them, we can kind of see them, or we're making annual plans around these risks probably occurring and how are we going to contend with them. We always start in the survey by asking people to think about their current risk, just so they don't inadvertently name a current risk as what they think could be an emerging or strategic risk. There's broad categories. So for example, climate risk, yeah, there may be things that could be happening right now, but there's emerging climate risks that you may be thinking about 3 to 5 years down the road. But always trying to level set that, there's things you're worrying about today, those are your current risks, and what do you think might be emerging? And so, the first question is listed on the bottom of the page. The ways that risks have a large strategic impact on an organization can have different meanings and definitions, and so we ask them in the survey just to, note at first, what are some of the things that are, how are you considering risk in your work, in the work that you're doing? Is it disruption? Is it a financial impact? What are things that might be happening to your industry in the scope of the world economy today? And then lastly, to level set, we kind of use the World Economic Forum for these broader categories of risks. And the World Economic Forum kind of came up with this categorization about 15, 20 years ago. We've been using that as a structure, and it's been helpful. I think it's also been helpful because you'll see some broad definitions of climate change. You'll see terrorism. You'll see, severe weather. And those are overarching concepts, but it might, change a little bit over time as to what we think the definitions of those are. Especially at the bottom, you see technological risks and disruptive technology. Well, what was disruptive in technology maybe 15 or 20 years ago could be radically different than what we see in disruptive technology today, yet that same structure, that same concept is what we're asking people to think about and to note what types of risks they might be facing. So with that as a start, I'm going to flip it over to Xiao here to run through some of the Asia-Pacific results.
So thank you, Dale. So as this is our recent survey results conducted in the Asia-Pacific market and the Greater China region. So basically, let me just quickly summarize of the quick findings from that report. So compared to last year's survey, we currently have the war still going on as a current consideration of the top current risk, reflecting the current low global landscape. And you can see that people still thinking the pandemics is still a quite relevant risk, but it has decreased in terms of importance compared to the last year result. And also compared to the, when we ask the people, what do you consider the top emerging risk? So you can actually see that the disruptive technology has quickly rising as a top emerging risk. So one key relevant feature we have actually happened in the world is the OpenAI has released a chatbot in late November of 2022, which is a large language model, but it is actually incorporated a lot of the generative AI technology. So you can see that by surveying the actuaries and risk managers, what are you considering as a top emerging risk going to impact us more in the next 5 or 10 years than disruptive technology has risen as a key consideration. And also, when we ask the actuaries to select 2 combined risk emerging will come as the top concern in the next few years. And you can see that over 50% of the actuaries actually respond that, okay, I'm going to think the disruptive technology will really have the real impact in the world in the next couple of years. And connected with the disruptive technology, you can see that the globalization shift and also other like the cyber network, these all related contexts actually being selected as well. So you can see that because the survey results actually are very relevant at the matter of time. So we conducted the survey from the 1st of March to the end of the March. So in that specific period, that the rise of the generative AI technology has actually dominated the top concern of the global actuarials' emerging risk perception. And also compared to last year's result, you can see that the economic risk consideration are quite stable, but the technological risks consideration has dominated and rise a lot in terms of the disruptive technology, considering the possibility of the trend, the AI is going to dominate. And the technology rise is clearly due to the disruptive technology, considering the ChatGPT. And the environmental risk is still a greater concern considered globally, because essentially you can see the war effect is going to intensify the climate change, while the climate change also having the potential effect that some of the previously habitable spaces become inhabitable. So that will be basically increasing the chance of the war. And also, like, the societal risk becomes a lesser concern. We primarily due to the COVID-19. So because of recently, the WHO recently announced the official end of the COVID-19 period. So you can see that the societal risk compared to the last year is becoming a lesser concern. And there is a very optimistic view from the ERM, the enterprise risk management function, their impact on the overall, the organization operation. So you can see that about 57 of the respondents actually see that ERM has a positive impact on their company operation. And implementing the ERM actually improves their risk-adjusted return. And also, we're gladly to share that compared to last year's view, that we can see the economic outlook become better. So compared to last year, the dominant answer is the economic outlook is going to be poor, but actually this year, like the majority, like over 50% of the respondents consider that, okay, we're going to have a moderate economic outlook this year. And also we have seen a greater share of respondents provide the economic good outlook going to be blooming. All right, so I'm going to hand over back to Dale to give us a higher level summary from the global risk perspective.
Okay, thank you. You know, when we look at these global risk perceptions, the results on the screen here are from, you know, a little bit more North American focus. So it's interesting to kind of compare what's happening in Asia Pacific markets. I will note this survey was, in comparison to what Xiao was describing, the North American focused one was held in October of 2022. So I guess I'm trying to level set where we were at that point. You know, third year of a pandemic, Russia-Ukraine had already been in place for about 8 to 10 months. Although it was prior to, you know, a lot of things happening with focus on climate risk at COP27 that was going to be happening in Egypt, and clearly before this, at least, you know, more public awareness of artificial intelligence, OpenAI, ChatGPT, things like that. So, you know, put that in mind as we see what some of the results were. This gives a little bit of a longitudinal overview of where you see pandemic and infectious disease was as a current risk. And, you know, when we produce this survey, I always kind of think of maybe somewhere in the 10 to 15% range as being, you know, people are kind of paying attention to it or recognizing it. And you'll see that pandemic and infectious disease, even, you know, leading up to 2019, was, you know, well below that as a standard. So all of a sudden in 2020, there is this current event risk called the pandemic that comes into play. And not only that, you see people are starting to label it even as an emerging risk or a top 5 emerging risk. You know, what is going to be the horizon for this type of risk in the future as well? Maybe, you know, with some comfort a little bit in 2022, both as a current risk and an emerging risk, it's gone back below that, you know, that 10% level, more in the 5 to 7%. At least maybe now the world has kind of shifted to accepting that, hey, this is a risk. We've maybe attended to it or gotten through it, and we're less focusing it on as a current risk or something that may be emerging again on the horizon. Though, you know, as Xiao was mentioning, you know, war, we include in this category like any civil wars that may impact local economies as well. That has certainly picked up as a top 5 emerging risk, notably in 2022. But even prior to that point in time, it would have been above like my artificial threshold of, you know, 15% or so. People were worried about this, thinking about this. What are some places around the world that conflicts may arise? And people are thinking, you know, what is the potential for, you know, wars to occur, conflicts to occur? What are kind of the economic or GDP issues that might occur from that? What does this mean for, the future of the insurance industry or for how pension plans or other things might be impacted by asset returns. So important to kind of keep an eye on where that goes as an emerging risk as people are paying attention to it. And then obviously it's growing into our current landscape, unfortunately, in some cases. One of the key takeaways too was just to look at the trends of some global risk perceptions. These are lists of where people are thinking about emerging risks over the years. How many, what are the top 5 categories that people are thinking about on the horizon? And on the right-hand side of the screen, you do see things like climate change. Has always been in the current emerging risk category. Disruptive technology, if you follow that across the page, kind of in the middle, the third most in 2019, fourth in 2014 or 2020, 2021, and then it kind of falls off in 2022. I'm probably expecting that to become a little bit more of a current or emerging risk concern. How do these artificial intelligence, machine learning, large language models interact with society, interact with the actuarial and risk management profession? What should we be aware of? Are there issues that we need to contend with? Even in the U.S., there's been a lot of focus in recent times on NVIDIA, a company that is high into the technology of artificial intelligence. All of a sudden, it becomes one of the top 5 market capitalization stocks in the U.S. market, simply because of a growing focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning and the computing power needed to do that type of stuff. And where does that take us in the future? And risk managers are starting to look onto that horizon and see what the implications might be. One of the takeaways too was just kind of noting what volume of percentage of responses among their people's top 5 current and emerging risks. They're listed here. People worried in the current environment about financial volatility, climate change, and wars. And then, interesting that climate change is kind of both on the current and emerging, and I think that gives credit to its broad description that there are certainly things that are climate risk events, whether that's individual storms or wildfires or things that are going on in different markets, but also the transitional risks that may be on the horizon, both positively and negatively, I'm sure, for climate change. And if we move towards more net zero, if we move towards lower greenhouse gas emissions, what type of risk or opportunities might that present for risk managers? Global economic expectations are shown here. We've kind of put this in a place where you see, what were people thinking for 2021, 2022, and 2023. Maybe the most notable thing is that, very few, if any, of our respondents thought that there was a strong economic expectation for the next coming years in 2023. If you kind of think about this as a distribution, we are shifting much more to moderation among these respondents as to what their economic expectations will be in the coming years. I think we saw a little bit of that in the Asia Pacific survey as well. And then we specifically asked over the past couple years on the emerging risk survey, how much did the Great Resignation concept of your ability to attract talent or retain talent, did that play out? Or what was the respondents' sense? And I think that there's some pluses and minuses here. Maybe on the plus side is it seems that risk managers have now grown accustomed to transitioning to a little bit more flexible workforce, the ability to hire people or not lose people in 2022, a little less than what was happening in the pandemic, the ability to hire experienced staff, maybe because you're drawing from a larger labor pool that doesn't have to be working in your city anymore. You can go out and find resources to have experienced staff come be part of your team across a broader set of geographical locations that can be of benefit. And so the final slide just looks at some of the takeaways, and apologies if that's a little small, but these recent advances in generative AI technology, those are kind of things that people are thinking about today. What is the implications? How is that going to play into the work of risk managers? What different risks might people need to pay attention to as they do risk management? That's clearly on people's minds. The concerns about the risks of the pandemic have diminished. Maybe that's, it's a reason we're probably all in the room today. There's a general, sense that there's less risk today than there has been a year ago, 2 years ago, and that's enabling, different outcomes. Ongoing war in Ukraine, significant uncertainties, and I think there's different pockets around the world that people would point to say, just need to be aware, need to make sure that I'm paying attention to how conflict might play out. Great Resignation predominantly impacted the North American market a little bit more than Asia Pacific. And then, there's just some fundamental views on climate change, volatility, financial volatility, and disruptive technologies that are consistent. Those are continued to be in our current risk workspace, but also, are on the edge, potentially impacting risk management strategies for down the road. So with that, I think that's the final slide here. Yes, some disclaimers, et cetera. And maybe those should have been the first couple of slides, I don't know. But yeah, it's appropriate risk management survey to have those disclaimers. But Jazz, I guess we'd throw it back to you and just see if there's questions that we can attend to.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here. I think we have 5-6 minutes, so we have plenty of time for questions. First question is, how many jumps do you observe in your sample?
How many, say that again, how many jumps?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Okay.
Oh, it's from Mengyi Shu. Is Mengyi here?
Maybe I'll interpret that of like how consistent is the sample, over time, and I think it's been fairly consistent. I mean, in recent years, there's been 100, 150 kind of respondents. We certainly go out and try to encourage people who have responded to re-respond so that there's a consistency level of, what risk managers are looking towards, and not inadvertently saying, oh, now we're going to sample, 50 new people over here that might have a different longitudinal survey. So I think if that's the question, I think we try to make that as consistent over time.
Okay. Next is a good question as well. The top 5 emerging risks seem strongly anchored to evolving current risks. What can we do to be more forward-looking instead of reactive?
Yeah, I think that's, what we find in some of the things is, again, the breadth of the definition of these World Economic Forum risk categories, and that I may, for example, interpret climate risk to be, hey, that's something I'm paying attention to because I know in my property casualty or life or health or pension world, there are going to be shocks to that system I need to prepare for. The broader definition, though, of climate risk might be, things are on the horizon. There's a transition of an economy towards, maybe new thinking, or these types of equities that I own today are maybe more susceptible to current risk shocks. There's another set of equities that is as economies transition to a future state that I might be more worried about on the horizon. And so, yes, I think that there's, you'll see those types of things popping up in both current and emerging, but, try to recognize that the second layer of those underneath the heading may be radically different risks that people are thinking about.
Okay. We have another one. Your classification seems to be pastel without L. Now, I don't know what that is. That could be a typo. Could there be legal regulatory risks included as well? Does that question make sense?
For the risk categories, we primarily follow the categories published by the World Economic Forum, and that has been used consistently for the past 16 or 17 years. But we also have the open question to ask specifically for the actuaries and risk managers' input, like the open question, like what do you think should be further included in the category? But for the survey purposes, we wanted to keep it consistent as possible in the long run.
Yeah, and I think when we had up on one slide, the concept of the risk categories. One of them is under societal risk is kind of regulatory framework. And so, if people were seeing on the horizon, oh, we may shift a regulatory framework from point A to point B over the next 5 years, then that could be something on the emerging category. Or if you were, ready to implement IFRS 17 in the local environment, then that's a current risk that people would be thinking about. So I think the regulatory environment under that subcategory of societal risks is trying to be incorporated in that way, and thinking about how much is that going to impact the organization that I'm working at.
Okay. The next one is, it would be good to know whether insurance companies plan to react on these emerging risks. Do you have? I think the question is trying to ask, it'd be good to know how insurance companies react to these emerging risks. Do you have any insights on this?
Yeah, I guess I would say you see when you talk to kind of insurance company risk managers that they're thinking about things that are on the horizon. They do their enterprise risk management, and maybe the chief risk officer is bringing in a lot of current information. What are different compartments of the organization worrying about, contending with, thinking about. But I do think that those chief risk officers also are taking a portion of their time and saying, hey, here's where the organization's strategies could be at risk. So they tend to have, I guess, maybe 70% of their time in the current risk environment. That's what is keeping them awake currently at night. They're attending to things that are happening in the local financial economic environment. But I would say, good risk managers or good CROs are also the ones that are helping kind of write the documents that as strategies are being implemented, saying here's kind of some broader things on the horizon that could happen.
Yeah, just on top of that, we do get comments from the actuaries. Like, it actually depends really on their area of practices. Like for medical scientists and medical insurance actuaries, they pretty much concentrate on the medical technology advancement. And for the GI, the general insurance or property casualty insurance companies, they do have the expertise in terms of climate change, climate modeling. So it really depends on their practice of areas.
I think we're out of time. We can make time for that observation, but we'll leave these three outstanding questions for later.
So just one more. Don't want to go too much beyond time, but just got a question for the panel around how do you differentiate between risks that are sort of transient in nature and risks that are actually there for the long term? Because I think, for example, most recently with COVID, the central banks got it wrong as well. Well, for the most part, they printed too much money, but even experts could get it wrong in the field. So what would be your advice on how to identify not just emerging risks or current risks, but ones that are actually transient there for the short term, and they're ones that are actually there for the long term? Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and there's probably no quick objective answer. But some of the ones that are financial in nature, I think people would consider they're longer term. It's hard to change interest rates on a dime. It's hard to understand where equity returns are going to be, and watch them turn quickly. So the financial ones, the ones that are kind of dominated by the regulatory framework or the economic framework, I think I see more people thinking of those as, horizon risks, emerging risks. You do have to deal with it. I mean, if your equity portfolio goes down in 20% in one day, yeah, you got to contend with that. But I think people are, kind of looking at what the potential for that to emerge over a long period of time, and what strategies should they be worried about there.
I think we'll move on to the next presentation, Managing Insurers' Liquidity Risk from Laurie.